3 days ago, I was supposed to start my honeymoon with my husband, Joey. Unfortunately, he invited his cousin Pete along without consulting me first. I was really frustrated and ended up not going on the trip at all. Joey and I met through friends and got married a couple of weeks ago after dating for almost 4 years. Our plan was to honeymoon in Italy, but Joey decided to bring Pete along without discussing it with me beforehand. The worst part was Joey's timing. He told me just 30 minutes before our flight was scheduled to take off. He casually mentioned that Pete would join us after 2 days of alone time, as if we had agreed on it beforehand. When I asked why he hadn't talked to me about it earlier, Joey said he didn't want me to get upset, but he felt Pete needed a distraction after his wife, Julia, asked for a divorce shortly after our wedding. Pete and Julia had been high school sweethearts and had been married for almost 3 years. Julia's decision left Pete devastated, and Joey thought inviting him on our honeymoon would help him cope. I was upset and told Joey this was not acceptable to me. I insisted he cancel Pete's plans immediately, but Joey argued that Pete needed our support during this tough time. He believed that the 2 days we had alone before Pete joined us should be enough for me. It was really exasperating, and I was very frustrated while talking to him. I just grabbed my things and told him that I didn't want to go on our honeymoon anymore. I told him to enjoy the trip with Pete, and I left almost immediately. He tried to catch up with me, but I made a run for it, took the first cab I found, and went to my parents' house. Since then, I've been staying here and have been very upset about everything. For the past 4 years that I've been with Joey, we've had our ups and downs, but they've always been normal fights that other couples also have. But this was just weird. From what I know, he did end up going on the trip with Pete, and that pissed me off even more. After I left the airport, he kept texting me to come back, saying he couldn't cancel everything because he had already paid and some of it was non-refundable. He didn't want to lose his deposit, so he had to go on the trip. He kept trying to convince me he was doing this to be there for Pete, and even said that after this we'd have a second honeymoon just for the two of us. He wanted me to compromise this one time. What really hurt me was that he decided to spring this on me at the last minute, so I couldn't do anything about it. I thought it was manipulative and dishonest. If I'm in a relationship with someone, I need them to be completely transparent with me, and I need to be able to trust them. After what he did, I don't think that's possible. So I messaged him last evening, telling him I was going to file for a divorce or an annulment. I just wanted this relationship to be over. I was very disappointed, but I couldn't see any other way forward. I don't think we can pretend everything is fine and move on with our lives after what happened. I'm not the kind of person who can just brush things under the rug and pretend it's okay. It sucked that our marriage was only going to last a couple of weeks, but this wasn't my fault. When he responded to my message saying I was overreacting and that we could discuss this when he came back from the trip, it was really annoying. I was already so pissed off that he decided to go on the trip with his cousin. I told him his behavior was unreasonable and he couldn't expect me to forgive him and just move on. I made it clear that I was done with all of this. I just wanted out of this relationship as fast as I could. I planned to wait for him to come back because I couldn't end the marriage without his consent, but I would talk to my lawyer and have everything prepared. Then I blocked him so I wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. I needed peace of mind and time to process all of this. His family can't seem to accept that. This morning I received a bunch of messages from my in-laws saying what I was doing was messed up and that I should at least give him a chance to fix the situation. They agree that what he did was wrong, but they thought my decision to end the marriage was an overreaction. Obviously, they would take their son's side over mine. We've had a good relationship over the past couple of years, and I thought they would realize what he did was immensely screwed up, but they think I should give him a chance. My parents think I should do whatever I feel is right, and I think I should end the marriage. However, judging by people's reactions so far, I'm very confused. His parents are quite against the idea of us ending our marriage and think we should wait, talk to each other, and come to a conclusion only after having a conversation in person once he returns from his trip. My parents are pretty neutral and support me no matter what. I've spoken to a couple of my friends about this as well, but they are divided. Some think I should wait for him to come back, discuss this with him, and then decide. Others believe what I'm doing now is the right thing to do. They think I should file for an annulment and get this over with because what he did was not okay. So would I be wrong for ending my marriage because my husband decided to invite his cousin, who's going through a divorce, on our honeymoon? Edit. Many people have asked about Joey and Pete's closeness. They have been best friends since they were little and are very close. However, I still don't think that's an excuse to invite him on our honeymoon and expect me to be fine with it. I had no idea Pete was going through a divorce. In fact, I don't think anyone in the family knew until all of this came out. From what I've gathered, Pete's wife, Julia, had just filed for divorce after we got married, and the proceedings haven't started yet. They will commence once he returns from this trip. Julia and I have never really been friends. We've interacted a few times during holidays, but we don't have much to talk about, so I'm definitely not going to discuss this with her. Many people have also asked who Pete was actually in love with, and honestly, I have no idea. Joey didn't get into that, and I don't think she has specified who it was. If I find out who she's in love with or if she's having an affair, I will update everyone. For now, I've shared all the information I have. I'm not too worried about the financial aspect of the divorce. If we get an annulment, we shouldn't have trouble separating assets, since we've always maintained separate finances and records. We don't have many joint assets, so that should be a pretty easy process. But I don't even know what I'm going to do right now. I'm just trying to process everything, and that's been very difficult. Update 1. Hello. I've spoken to my lawyer and told him I want to get this marriage annulled. It was incredibly difficult to do, but it's been almost a week, and Joey is still blocked. He can contact me in other ways, yet he hasn't. I'd only blocked his phone number so he could still call me. I haven't blocked him on social media, so if he really wanted to speak to me, he could have texted me on any platform. But I haven't received a single message from him. Even his parents called me only once, and then there was radio silence from them too. I've been feeling terrible about all of this for the past few days, which forced me to make this decision. I had considered letting him come back so we could discuss things in person and decide what to do next, but now I think there's no moving on from this. Thankfully, I still had the keys to our house, so I went over, gathered my stuff, and moved back in with my parents. When he comes back, we'll have to talk, sell the furniture we bought together, and end the lease or at least remove me from the agreement. I've already spoken to a few people and will start looking for a separate apartment. I just want to keep busy so I don't have to dwell on how miserable I feel. I keep thinking he will text me at some point, but so far he hasn't. I hope there will be some way to work this out, but it's unlikely. My parents and most of my friends have been very supportive, and I'm grateful for that. According to our plan, Joey and I were supposed to return from our honeymoon in 2 days, so if he and Pete stick to the itinerary, they'll be back then. After that, I can finally speak to him in person and put an end to all of this. It hurts so much to say it, but I know it's the right thing to do. I just have to end this for my own good and hope things go smoothly when he comes back. Update 2. Joey and Pete came back from their trip yesterday, according to our itinerary. I know this because after they returned, Joey texted me on Instagram to ask if we could talk. I was working at the time and didn't want to respond, but I was so upset that I ended up replying anyway. I told him that no, we couldn't talk because the time to talk had passed. He had chosen not to contact me for the past week, even though he had screwed up royally and hurt my feelings. I had no interest in speaking to him. I also informed him that I had already spoken to my lawyer, and now that he was back, we could move forward with the annulment. For a couple of minutes, there was no reply from him. Then he told me he was really sorry for not contacting me earlier, but he was just trying to be there for Pete. He said he understood I was upset, but there were a lot of things I didn't know and factors he had to consider. If I just spoke to him, he could explain his reasons. I'm not going to lie, that piqued my interest. If he had reasons, I wanted to know them, even though I couldn't imagine any that would justify what he did. After thinking about it for a while, I told him to come over to my parents' house today. He's supposed to come by this evening, and we can discuss things. I don't think I'll go back to him no matter what, but I deserve some answers. My lawyer dropped off the annulment papers this morning, so even if I don't get a satisfactory explanation, we can still move forward with the process. We were going to have to meet at some point, and I couldn't avoid him forever. I just want to get this over with as soon as possible. Hopefully he has a good explanation, because if he doesn't, it's just going to mess with my head even more. He's going to be here in a couple of hours, so I'm mentally preparing myself for that. Update 3. Joey came by, as he said, and just left about an hour ago. I'm still reeling from everything he told me. When he arrived, he seemed very awkward and started by apologizing. He admitted that what he did was horrible and that he had broken my trust. He knew it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to repair that, so he wasn't going to force me to come back or beg me to fix things. I was surprised because I had expected him to try to make things work. He explained that Pete had always been like a brother to him, and knowing he was going through a divorce because his wife was in love with someone else, Joey felt really bad for him. That was one reason he invited Pete on our honeymoon, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. The real reason he invited Pete was that the person Julia was actually in love with was Joey himself. When he said that, I honestly thought he was joking, and I didn't know how to react for a few minutes. Then I asked him how he knew, and when he found out, he told me that Julia had confessed to him the night before our wedding. He even unlocked his phone and showed me the text she had sent, and I could hardly believe what I was seeing. From the time I'd known his family, I had always noticed that he and Julia seemed to have a strong platonic relationship. It had never even occurred to me that she could have been in love with Joey because I had always just written them off as friends and nothing more. But that was clearly not the case. When I saw the text, I asked him why he hadn't told me about it. As his fiancé, I should have known that someone in the family had confessed their love for him the night before our wedding. Joey told me that he didn't want to stir up any drama right before the wedding, so he decided not to tell me. I thought that was a lame reason and told him it was a pretty bad idea. He didn't argue with me. He just agreed and said he wasn't thinking straight and was trying to avoid drama at any cost. On the day of our wedding, after the ceremony was over, he decided to speak to Julia in person. He took her aside for a few minutes during the reception and asked if she meant what she said in the text. When she confirmed it, he told her she had to leave Pete because she was wasting his time if she didn't love him. He said Pete deserved better. Joey told her that if she didn't tell Pete, he would. They had an argument because Julia didn't want to tell Pete. She believed that since Joey wasn't going to leave me for her, it seemed like a waste to tell Pete and leave him. She was at least content with Pete, even if she wasn't completely happy. Joey told her she was being disgusting and needed to leave Pete if she didn't love him. My husband played a huge role in his brother's divorce, and out of guilt, he invited Pete to join us on our honeymoon so Pete wouldn't feel as miserable. He explained that he knew how much Pete loved Julia and how difficult this was for him, and he didn't want to leave him alone. After hearing him out, I tried to process all this information. Then I asked him why he hadn't just been honest with me from the beginning. All these problems ruining our relationship were due to his lack of transparency. He had no answer for that. He just said he didn't want to get into it because he thought it would lead to more drama and confrontations, and he wasn't good at handling those. After this discussion, he told me that if I still wanted to proceed with the annulment, I could, but he wanted to get this off his chest and tell me the truth. I told him that getting the marriage annulled was not something I was excited about, but it was necessary at this point. It was clear he was still struggling to be honest, and that wasn't going to work in a marriage. I appreciated that he had come clean, but it was too little too late. By trying so hard not to leave Pete alone, he took me for granted and ended up leaving me alone. I told him how miserable I had been for the past few days and that he hadn't even checked up on me, which hurt the most. He tried to justify himself by saying he was trying to be there for Pete, but I told him it didn't matter. He had promised me when we started dating that he would always be there for me and show me how much he loved me. Even in his wedding vows, he made these promises, but I hadn't felt his love or presence since. I told him I understood that he felt lost when Julia sent that message, but if I were in his place, my first thought would have been to tell my fiancé. We could have dealt with it together. He acknowledged that he had messed up. Then he asked if I still loved him, and after thinking about it, I told him I did, but it didn't matter. Love alone wasn't enough to sustain a relationship. We both needed time to heal, and going our separate ways was the best way to do that. When I said that, he just nodded, and I saw tears in his eyes. I felt really bad, but I knew there was no other way out of this. Despite how terrible I felt, we filled out the paperwork and will have our marriage annulled in a couple of days. I'm still trying to process everything I learned this evening. Moving on won't be easy, but I have to at least try. We had one last hug before he left, and I almost broke down, but I stayed strong. I have to keep that strength until I can move on completely. Wish me luck. I have a feeling I'm going to need it. Update 4. It's been close to a year since I broke up with Joey and we got the marriage annulled. A couple of weeks after that, I gathered the last of my things from our house and moved into my own apartment. It was very difficult to go back to living on my own after years of living with Joey, but I had to get used to it. For the first couple of months after the breakup, we avoided each other and didn't speak. About 4 months ago, we met again at a wedding of a mutual friend. Both of us attended, and when we met, we were friendly. It wasn't like it used to be, but I was glad. I had expected it to be very hard to see him again, but it wasn't that bad, and we're now on speaking terms as friends. I learned that while Pete was getting divorced, Joey told him the truth about Julia being in love with him. Once Pete found out, he decided to cut Joey off, and they no longer speak. Taking Pete on our honeymoon didn't soften the blow as Joey had hoped. We even joked that maybe going on the honeymoon alone would have saved our marriage. We reminisced about old times with our friends and had a generally fun time. Joey told me he moved out of our old house a couple of months after I did because it became unaffordable without someone to split the rent. He also mentioned quitting his job to start something of his own, which he had always talked about. I was really happy for him. I shared a bit about my life, too, and we discovered we live just a couple of blocks away from each other. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm happy to be in this neutral space. To be honest, I'm not sure if I've completely moved on from him yet, but being on good terms with him makes me happy. Our relationship might not have lasted, but